Let's start by talking about a cage. A gilded cage built not of iron bars but of melody and faith. At the dawn of Farloom's memory, a being of primal silk arrived, a pale divinity who offered only two paths, devotion or destruction. Her name was Grandmother Silk, and her very essence was the soul-spun thread that could heal, empower, and bind. But for her children, the weavers whom she raised from common bugs, this devotion became an eternal servitude, a song they were forced to sustain for a monarch who saw them only as instruments. This will make more sense by the end, as we unravel the threads that connect this ancient bondage to the kingdom's final, silent scream. The unifying tension of Farloom is this very duality, a holy citadel that is, in truth, a prison, a sacred song that is a lullaby of containment, and a revered mother who is a sleeping beast. The entire kingdom, in its gilded splendor, is a monumental act of rebellion disguised as worship. If an idea strikes you during this breakdown, share it in the comments. I'd love to see how you interpret it. The story of Farloom as we come to know it through Hornet's unwilling pilgrimage does not begin with the citadel's shining spires, but in the deep, forgotten histories of the land itself, long before the first notes of the eternal song were ever played. Before the arrival of the pale matriarch, Grandmother Silk, Farloom was not a unified kingdom but a tapestry of disparate civilizations, each with its own culture, its own rulers, and its own unique way of life. These were societies carved from coral, rustling leaves, and sun-scorched earth, living in a precarious but organic balance. They existed, it seems, without the grand, unifying, and ultimately crushing weight of a singular divine will pressing down upon them. You'll recall that Hornet, upon her forced arrival, moves through the ruins and remnants of these lost peoples. To the southeast lay the sun-bleached expanse known as the Farfields and the Hunter's March, a vast territory of rolling moors and arid plains. This was the domain of the Scar, a formidable tribe of ants bound together in fierce loyalty to their queen, the Scar singer Carmelita. She was a warrior of immense renown, a songstress whose voice was said to rally her people and strike fear into their enemies. The Scar were a pragmatic and ruthless people, their culture steeped in the traditions of the hunt. Their warriors, from the towering Scar guards to the stealthy Scar stalkers, were trained from birth in the arts of combat and survival, their shells adorned with the bones of their prey, which served as both grim trophies and functional weaponry. Their lands were a testament to their prowess, riddled with cunningly devised traps meant to ensnare the massive beasts that roamed the fields. Yet their society was not monolithic. Just as in a true ant colony, there were defined roles. Smaller, nimbler Scarwings acted as scouts and support units, while the humble Scarids dutifully gathered the spoils of the hunt, ensuring the survival of the nest. They were a complete and self-sufficient civilization, defined by strength and a deep-seated communal bond under their warrior queen. To the northwest, nestled within the jagged, crystalline beauty of the coral sands of Karsak, lived a people of equal hardiness. This was the kingdom of the Blade Bugs, a society ruled by the formidable Crust King Khan. His power was said to be so absolute that he could command the very coral of his domain, shaping the reef to his will. His throne was the Coral Tower, a breathtaking vertical reef that pierced the cavern sky, a fortress of living architecture where he was protected by his most loyal and dangerous subjects. The inhabitants of Karsak were as unforgiving as their environment. Creatures like the spine-beak kai, a species of aggressive fish, patrolled the waters, their sharp proboscises a constant threat to outsiders. Crust crawlers camouflaged themselves perfectly within the coral, becoming indistinguishable from the rock until they struck. The entire ecosystem was a weapon, and its people were its masters, their loyalty to their king as unyielding as the ancient coral itself. They expected much from one another, and in return, they built a kingdom that was both beautiful and deadly. In stark contrast to the martial societies of the Scar and the Blade Bugs was Shellwood, a sprawling, overgrown forest teeming with life. This region did not have a conventional ruler in the same way the others did. Instead, its heart was a plant-like being known as Nith, a sort of primordial nature spirit who was intrinsically connected to every leaf, root, and creature within the woods. Nith was not a monarch who demanded fealty but a guardian who ensured balance. In her time, her presence guaranteed safe passage through the often treacherous forest paths, a silent pact between the spirit and the land's inhabitants. Shellwood was a pure ecosystem, a delicate dance of predator and prey where each creature, from the lowly grub to the fearsome wood wasp, played a crucial role. Hornet herself notes that the destruction of a single wasp nest could dangerously tip the scales, suggesting a world governed by natural law rather than royal decree. The creatures here lived for themselves, yet their existences were interwoven, creating a complex, living entity that was Shellwood itself. Finally, to the east lay the enigmatic land of Verdania, a solitary kingdom whose people rarely ventured beyond their borders. They were ruled by twin princes, lovers who were adored by their subjects for the grace and beauty they brought to their court. Though we only learn the name of one, the Green Prince, their joint rule was defined by a unique philosophy that blended artistry with lethality. The warriors of Verdania practiced what was known as a ballet of death, a fighting style that was as elegant as it was violent, a mesmerizing dance of blades used to repel any who dared to threaten their peaceful isolation. They were a culture of aesthetics and self-preservation, content within their own domain and fiercely protective of it. For a time, these disparate lands coexisted. The historical records are sparse, their relationships with one another lost to the ages, but we know they existed, proud and independent. This fragile equilibrium was destined to be shattered by the arrival of a power far greater and more demanding than any they had known. A higher being, Grandmother Silk, descended upon Farloom. In the lore of this world, a higher being is a creature of otherworldly power, capable of shaping reality and the very minds of lesser bugs. The Pale King of Hallownest, for example, granted sapience to the bugs of his kingdom, lifting them from instinct into consciousness. Grandmother Silk possessed a similar, perhaps even more primal power. It is said she was the one who elevated the common farlids, simple spiders of the land, into the weavers, her so-called children, by imbuing them with her divine silk. A memory fragment reveals a small, unassuming spider slowly, almost painfully, transforming into the elegant form of a weaver, its body reshaped by a single, glowing thread of silk. This act of creation was not born of benevolence, but of a desire for instruments to serve her will. Indeed, Hornet's own words provide the most chilling insight into the nature of pale beings like her father and Grandmother Silk. Devotion or destruction, she states, these are the only fates my kind allow. Dominance, she admits, is baked deep into her blood. Pale beings do not seek to coexist, they seek to rule. The Pale King, once a great worm, shed his colossal form to become a king revered by his subjects. Grandmother Silk operated from the same impulse, but where the Pale King offered enlightenment as a means of control, her methods were far more direct. She did not engage in diplomacy, she demanded absolute fealty, and her arrival spelled doom for the ancient tribes of Farloom. The specifics of this great subjugation are lost to time, but the scars on the land tell the story. Crust King Khan's magnificent coral tower is gone, vanished as if it never was. His once proud warriors are now little more than terracotta husks, their bodies crusted over and frozen in time, eternally standing guard over a dead kingdom. Only a single lonely soldier remains, perched at the edge of his former land, so stiffened by the ages that he has become a statue, a monument to his people's defeat. Queen Carmelita and a handful of her Scar tribe still live, but they are a scattered, broken people, their song queen a withered shadow of her former glory, her power faded, her body aged beyond its years. Nith, the heart of Shellwood, appears to have perished, and though the forest itself endures, it has become a wild and dangerous place, the old pact of safe passage broken. Without its guardian spirit, Shellwood reverted to a primal state, its delicate balance thrown into chaos. Verdania alone was offered a reprieve from utter destruction, but the price was a profound tragedy. To appease the encroaching power of Grandmother Silk, one of the twin princes, the lover of the Green Prince, sacrificed his life. His very soul and shell were given as tribute, rendered down to serve as the mold for a pair of exquisite automatons, the Cogwork Dancers, a beautiful and grotesque perversion of Verdania's own artistry. But even this terrible sacrifice proved futile. Verdania eventually fell to ruin anyway, its elegant courts reduced to barren caverns, leaving the surviving Green Prince to mourn alone in a dead land, a testament to the fact that with a pale being there is no negotiation, only delayed annihilation. Grandmother Silk's conquest was not merely physical, it was spiritual. Any alternative form of worship was systematically stamped out. The ruined chapel, attended by a lonely chapel maid, stands as evidence of this purge. She speaks of it as the price for choosing a different path, implying that her faith was deemed heretical and its place of worship shut down or destroyed. Smaller sects like the fire worshippers of the Wisp Thicket, who revere their totem god, the Father of the Flame, were pushed to the fringes, their beliefs tolerated only as long as they remained insignificant. This spiritual cleansing was designed to funnel all devotion towards a new, singular faith, the worship of the weavers and, through them, their unseen mother. Throughout the lands of Farloom, Hornet discovers evidence of this manufactured religion. Weaver shrines and effigies are scattered everywhere, small objects of prayer depicting the graceful, blessed, and divine forms of the spider matriarchs. Pilgrims were lured into Farloom from a town on the surface, seduced by sweet promises whispered by the weavers. They were drawn down into the depths, their free will subtly manipulated to become the first followers of this new creed. The religion itself was built on a foundation of song. Music is woven into the very fabric of Farloom's culture. Currency is measured in measures and beats. A powerful caste within the citadel is known as the conductors. The weavers recorded their secrets on enchanted rune harps. And Hornet's own needle can be used as an instrument, the needle in, to play upon the souls of others, a power that hints at the very mechanism the weavers may have used to draw in their flock. Once they arrived, these pilgrims were greeted by the Citadel of Song, a breathtakingly ornate and majestic city, a shining beacon of gold and white meant to serve as the holy heart of the kingdom. To an outsider, it was paradise. Members of the Citadel were clad in pristine robes, signifying their piety. They were assigned holy duties. Envoys led the choirs, bell-bearers rang the great bells that echoed through the halls, and sentinels guarded the populace from any hint of threat or dissent. All who were free of sin were promised eternal care and belonging. The Citadel was a place of luxury, with grand spas, massive dining halls, and a great stage for performances, all designed to project an image of divine grace and unending prosperity. This was the beautiful, intricate lie that concealed a terrible truth. This was the cage. Beneath the gilded surface of the Citadel, a cruel and insidious system of subjugation was at work, a mechanism designed to trap bugs in a cycle of endless, unthinking servitude. Hornet, with her unique perspective as both an outsider and an heir to this legacy, sees through the facade with chilling clarity. She describes the pilgrims as victims, drawn into the Citadel's maw only to be utterly consumed. This consumption was not merely spiritual, but physical and psychological, a complete erosion of the self in service to a false deity. A stark example of this exploitation can be found in the underworks, the cavernous industrial bowels that lie directly beneath the Citadel's pristine chambers. Here, bugs toil in inhumane conditions, choked by smog and deafened by the roar of machinery. They believe their labor is a form of prayer, a righteous step on their holy journey. They polish floors, clean walls near volatile lava pits, and operate the massive gears that power the city above, all under the conviction that their devotion will eventually be noticed by the holy ones who sing in the light. This faith is a poison. Lom, a bug trapped in a state of perpetual motion, runs endlessly on a treadmill, convinced that the Citadel sees his hard work and will one day grant him his holy reward. His mind has been so thoroughly colonized by this belief that he cannot rest, finding meaning only in his own exploitation. Hornet can even join him, running on an adjacent treadmill, and after a significant effort, a single, pathetic rosary might be ejected from the machine, a perfect metaphor for how the Citadel doles out just enough grace to keep its workforce running. The very environment is designed to grind them down. Benches, the only source of rest, require payment in rosaries for each use. A confessional booth offers not solace but an automated message, telling the penitent that their sins must be cleansed by working harder. Their faith has been weaponized against them, turned into a tool for their own oppression. This mindset is perhaps most tragically embodied by the old penitent, a bug encountered within the slab, the Citadel's brutal prison complex. The slab was constructed to punish those convicted of sinning against the Citadel's divine order, but the old penitent does not see it as a prison. He calls it a holy place of forgiveness, and even when Hornet frees him from his cell, he refuses to leave. He believes his imprisonment is a grace, a way to hide from the shame of his sins until they are withered away by time. To speak of freedom is, to him, the greatest blasphemy. His dialogue, when read with the needle, reveals a heartbreaking backstory. From wastes, from darkness, drawn down, blessed call, sisters accord, silence above. He was one of the surface dwellers, lured into Farloom by the weaver's sweet promises, only to find himself in a cage he now refuses to recognize as such. His mind has become the most effective prison of all. The cruelty of the slab extends even to its jailers, the guardflies. As the old penitent explains, they too are penitents. Their ancestors committed a grave, long-forgotten sacrilege against the citadel, a sin so profound that their descendants, for generations, have been born into the role of guards as their only hope for absolution. Guilt is their inheritance, servitude their only path to a salvation that will never come. This system makes it clear that the Citadel's theology of sin and forgiveness is nothing more than a justification for eternal forced labor. Even Hornet, who is generally compassionate, feels no sympathy for the guardflies. She hopes to kill their matriarch, the broodmother, to end their entire race. Her cold fury is born from witnessing a system that perpetuates suffering as a matter of sacred doctrine. This indoctrination begins at birth. The squirms of the blasted steps, the final approach to the Citadel's grand gate, are chosen from birth to act as arbiters of purity. A lore tablet proclaims, "Bugborn of Farloom, you have been chosen. May our Citadel's holy gilding harden your soft shell." From their first moments, they are conditioned to believe that their holy duty is to stand eternal judgment, brutally bashing in the heads of any pilgrim they deem sinful with a heavy mallet. Their song, when heard by Hornet, is a chilling chorus of self-surrender. Let's grow holy, let's grow stronger, we are chosen, all are chosen, we will serve. All will serve. Similarly, the vaultworms of the Whispering Vaults are raised in darkness, their entire existence dedicated to becoming living scrolls for the vault keepers, their bodies and minds repurposed into archives for the Citadel's history of lies. The Citadel's oppressive influence radiated outwards, poisoning the lands below. In Greymoor, a region that once grew a bounty of food, the bugs were ordered by the Citadel to cease their farming. Instead, their new purpose was to catch the silk drags that drifted down from above and respool them for the Citadel's use. As a result, the people of Greymoor were forced into a desperate, less sustainable form of agriculture, breeding muck roaches for their disgusting but life-sustaining guts. The very air and water of the kingdom were corrupted. The Citadel's industrial exhaust was rerouted and dumped directly into the region now known as Bellwater, polluting its once clean streams and earning the eternal hatred of the Stilken, a tribe of swamp dwellers whose home was turned into a toxic mire. The Citadel even turned on its own most loyal defenders. There was once a revered order of female warriors known as the Pinstresses, masters of needle and thread combat. The last surviving member explains their tragic fate. Our Grand Citadel learned well from the training of Pinstress past. Then it went and turned those teachings upon us. Their strength, once an asset to the Citadel, was eventually viewed as a threat to its absolute control. They were hunted down, their numbers overwhelmed, until only two remained, one in hiding and the other, the seamstress, having forsaken her violent past for a quiet life of stitching, though a decommissioned automaton near her home hints at her former power. The Citadel's reach was absolute. Bugs from the Forge home were requested to relocate to the deep docks under a hollow promise of holy esteem. Those who failed to meet their quotas were brutally punished by the four Forge brothers. And in its most desperate act of control, the Citadel sought to deny its subjects even the release of death. A bulletin board reads, "Due to unacceptably high injury and unsanctioned deaths." For Farloom Eternal, a bug who serves must never die. This was not born of compassion, but of cold, calculating logic. Dead bugs cannot work, dead bugs cannot sing, and the song above all else had to be sustained. All of this cruelty, all of this suffering was in service to one singular, secret purpose, keeping the eternal song alive. But what was this song, and what did it have to do with the seemingly absent grandmother Silk? The truth lay hidden in the citadel's deepest sanctums, a truth that reframed the entire kingdom not as a holy land, but as a meticulously constructed prison. The true purpose of the citadel, the secret that animated its every gear and sanctified its every cruelty, was that of a cage. The mask maker, an enigmatic figure who deals in the shaping of identity, reveals this reality to Hornet in no uncertain terms. He calls the citadel a monstrosity devised by her ancestors, the weavers, in their wicked, clever minds. He describes it as a system, a web designed for a single purpose, to keep their mother sealed in slumber and themselves free to lavish in their false rule. With this revelation, the entire narrative of Farloom shifts. The holy pilgrimage, the eternal song, the gilded architecture, it was all an elaborate mechanism of containment. This truth is poetically foreshadowed in the game's opening poem, Farloom's Folly. It speaks directly to the sleeping monarch. They see your beauty so frail and fine. They see your peace woven of faith and toil. They forget your heart bound in slumber and servitude. When you wake, they shall see your truth, a beast's nature bare to all. The poem lays bare the central deception. The bugs of Farloom see only the beauty of the citadel, a peace maintained by their own faith and hard labor. They are ignorant of the fact that this peace is contingent upon the subjugation of another being, a being whose heart is bound, and whose true, beastly nature is only temporarily suppressed. This is made vividly clear when Hornet finally reaches the cradle at the citadel's zenith. Here, inside a colossal cocoon of silk, lies the sleeping form of Grandmother Silk. Below her cocoon, countless strands of her own silk are stretched taut, woven into a gigantic loom. The bugs of the citadel have been harvesting the very essence of their sleeping god, turning her prison into a factory. The image of the cocoon on a crook, the symbol of their entire kingdom, is not an icon of worship, but a diagram of their system of exploitation. The Song of the Pilgrims was the key to this slumber. Deep within the whispering vaults, Hornet discovers the corpse of the vault's pontiff and a sacred psalm cylinder containing the melody of the vault keepers. The current keeper, Cardinius, explains that the pontiff held this melody jealously, for it contained a truth they were told to have found in the dark, something within the melody or the words. Something to set them silent. While the exact contents are never revealed, playing the needle near the pontiff's corpse uncovers fragmented, damning thoughts. Damned bugs, we prayed to cage, we sang her chains. Divine Silk, the prayers were not praises, they were incantations of imprisonment. The songs were not hymns, they were chains forged of sound. This devastating secret was hidden from the common bugs who believed they were worshipping graceful, divine beings. A Weaver lore tablet confirms this, describing the pilgrims as bugs born low, raised up by fervor, fostered, born and caught within our web, unknowing. They prayed to Weaver effigies, offering their songs to the Weaver's eternal, completely unaware that they were merely the unwitting jailers of the Weaver's own mother. But why would the Weavers betray their creator? What could drive them to such an elaborate and cruel act of matricide? A glimpse into their past comes from a memory belonging to Widow, the only Weaver who remained loyal to Grandmother Silk. The memory shows the Weavers endlessly playing harps as their mother watches over them. The accompanying text reads, "For her light eternal, our song sustains." Another memory fragment states Grandmother Silk's desire, their voices, their song, to devote eternal. They are ours, bound forever. Before the citadel, the Weavers were trapped in this very system. They were the original choir, forced to sustain an eternal song for a monarch who saw them as property. The citadel was their act of liberation. By creating a new song, a lullaby to put their mother to sleep, and by enthralling the bugs of Farloom into a false religion to sing it for them, the Weavers not only freed themselves but also seized power, becoming the new, false gods of the kingdom. The very harps they once played for their mother now sit silent and unused in the cradle, relics of their former servitude. The lore of the first sinner deepens this narrative of rebellion. Found locked away in a rune-sealed cage, she is a Weaver whose rage stems from a terrible revelation. A memory she shares with Hornet reveals that Grandmother Silk did not birth the Weavers but evolved them from common Farlids. She called us daughters, she called us divine, she lied, the memory screams. The first sinner whose name in the game's files is First Weaver, was likely the first of her kind to learn this truth and was imprisoned for the sin of apostasy for daring to claim that the weavers were not divine. The cage bears the citadel's sigil, suggesting she was imprisoned not by grandmother Silk but by her own sisters. Her knowledge was a threat to their newfound rule, which depended entirely on the pilgrims believing in their divinity. They chose to silence one of their own rather than let the web of their grand lie unravel. Her fate is a chilling testament to the lengths the weavers would go to maintain their freedom and their power, even if it meant mirroring the tyranny they had just escaped. However, the weavers' reign was not destined to be eternal. The burden of maintaining the citadel, even with the pilgrims' help, proved to be immense. Conductor Balador speaks of the mantle of rule being claimed greedily from the weavers, calling it a yoke, not crown. A rune harp containing the last words of the weavers confirms their desperation. Sisters, spiders, the burden is past. These simple bugs shall bear it in full. We shall die and wait and pray that one may come of silken strength enough to weave us free. Running the citadel was a constant, draining effort, and at some point the weavers realized their song was not a permanent solution. Hidden away in secret weave nests, they schemed for a more final answer. A lore tablet speaks of escaping their mother's gaze and weaving hope anew that we might break free this cursed web born of our naive foundation. They had come to see the citadel itself as another trap, a web of their own making that had ensnared them as well. They experimented, creating a being named Eva from rune and shell, an attempt to birth their own divine usurper. But she was a failure, a wish cast vain, divinity mimicked in form too frail. They devised a trap, the snare setter, a prototype weapon designed to bind their mother tight, but this too ended in failure. They even delved into the abyss, studying the nature of void, but these experiments yielded no viable weapon. Their power was waning, their options exhausted. Their only remaining choice was to flee. A map found in a hidden weave nest shows pathways out of Farloom, a final, desperate escape plan. The accompanying rune harp is a plea: flee, sisters, flee until your strength exhausts. So far you may escape at last her silken sight, to start anew, to sustain, free of web and service eternal. But fleeing would mean the end of the citadel's song, which would hasten grandmother Silk's awakening. To prevent this, they executed one last, great deception. They bequeathed the citadel to the bugs of Farloom, handing over the reins of their complex prison machine, tricking them into becoming their own jailers. And yet they left behind a sliver of hope, a prophecy of a savior of silken strength who might one day come to finish what they could not. A few weavers stayed behind, hidden in the shadows, waiting for this prophesied child to arrive and finally set them free. With the weavers gone, the administration of the citadel fell to three distinct factions: the conductors, the vault keepers, and the architects. These groups had likely existed in some form under the weavers, but now they held the full weight of the kingdom on their shoulders. They were entrusted with the threefold melody, the musical key required to reach the cradle and the sleeping monarch. The conductors held the most overt power, issuing edicts and managing the day-to-day operations. They seemed to be aware of the citadel's true purpose, as evidenced by Conductor Ramino's ominous poem, Farloom's Folly, and Conductor Balador's possession of the incriminating rune harp detailing the weaver's flight. This knowledge was a heavy burden. Balador questions if he would have ever accepted the duty had he known the cost, and it seems one conductor fled Farloom for good, unable to bear the weight of the lie. The vault keepers were tasked with guarding the secrets of the citadel. Their scroll readers dedicated their entire lives to memorizing and reciting prayer scrolls, preserving the kingdom's fabricated history. Vaultkeeper Cardinius, however, harbors a deep hatred for the weavers, calling them cursed and vicious, suggesting that knowledge of their manipulative deeds had soured within the keeper caste after they abandoned the kingdom. The architects, meanwhile, were the engineers of the citadel, maintaining its structure and developing new technologies. Their craft was heavily indebted to the tools and knowledge left behind by the weavers. Like their predecessors, they even dabbled in the creation of life, designing the cogwork sentinels, knights of metal and gear, who were sent beyond the citadel's walls to bring all bugs, forced safe, to serve the citadel. The word forced hints at a dark practice of kidnapping, turning the sentinels from protectors into slave takers. The architect's creations, and indeed much of the citadel's machinery, were powered by a disturbing source: silk flies. These strange white insects, which escaped from destroyed automatons, were created in the White Ward, a sub-area of the citadel that served as a horrifying laboratory. Here, the citadel's obsession with eternal life reached its monstrous conclusion. Bugs had silk injected directly into their shells to prolong their lives, as the citadel could not afford to lose singers to the natural process of death. A lore tablet states the ward's oath: "While song must be sung, none may falter." Infirmity, sickness, death, all are banished from our citadel. If bugs did die, their bodies were cremated so their silk could be recovered and recycled, a process that trapped their pain and wills within the threads, creating a cycle of unending, conscious torment. But the experiments went further. A device called a silk siphon was used to transform the silk-infused souls of dying bugs into the very silk flies that powered the kingdom. A choral commandment reveals this process: "Bug of voice grown hoarse or shell fallen frail, you have been selected for duty most sacred. Become our light, our guide in darkness." Their very souls were repurposed into fuel, their consciousness trapped inside machines, forced to serve beyond shell. This was the grim reality of the citadel's promise of eternal life. Perhaps the architect's greatest and most tragic achievement was the cogwork core. This massive, intricate structure of gears, shafts, and music box-like cylinders was built to sustain the eternal song automatically. With rows of statues at its peak capable of producing the melody, the core could replace the need for living pilgrims altogether. The maintenance could be handled by automatons, and any new arrivals could be directed straight down into the underworks to toil as laborers, their voices no longer required. This was the final state of the citadel. A grand, gilded lie where a fake religion was practiced by fake worshippers, machines singing a lullaby to a sleeping god in a prison disguised as a paradise. But despite all these schemes, despite the layers of deception and the mountains of sacrifice, it was not enough. The song was fading, the beast was beginning to stir. Despite the monumental efforts of both the weavers and their successors, the citadel cast, the awakening of Grandmother Silk, was an inevitability they could only delay, never prevent. Conductor Ballador, in a moment of weary resignation, confesses this truth to Hornet. He admits that the mantle of rule was a yoke, not a crown, and that in the end, only one monarch's claw ever clutched this kingdom, though we raised our voices to cry otherwise. The citadel cast was forced to confront the same terrifying reality that had driven the weavers to flee. Even in her slumber, Grandmother Silk remained the only true power in Farloom. The song grew weaker, the cogwork core faltered, and eventually the citadel fell silent. It was in this silence that the haunting began. Grandmother Silk's consciousness began to seep back into the world. Her threads, no longer just a resource to be harvested, became extensions of her will, reaching down from the kingdom's peak. They started with the bugs in the citadel and slowly spread, descending all the way to Lower Farloom, binding the inhabitants of the land to her mind. These spectral threads, visible when bugs are defeated or when Hornet plays her needle in, were the instruments of her ray conquest. A mysterious figure known as the Learned Pilgrim, whose research was cut from the final game but whose notes remain, provides a chilling analysis of the haunting's mechanics. The tablet begins in the air, the water, everywhere. After generations of living in a kingdom saturated with silk, the very environment of Farloom had become an extension of the monarch. The tablet continues, inside their shells, twisted. Inside guts, tightest around heart, pulsing rhythm. The silk had worked its way into the very biology of the bugs, wrapping itself around their hearts. This was exacerbated by the horrific experiments of the White Ward. The silk implanted in those pilgrims was passed down to their offspring, creating generations of bugs who were genetically predisposed to this spiritual enslavement. The tablet concludes with a note of horror: sick, alive, dead, something worse, deeper, must look deeper. The haunting did not just control the living, it could reanimate the dead, turning long-deceased bugs into mindless puppets, forcing them to continue the tasks they performed in life. Pavo of Belhart, who briefly becomes entangled in similar threads, describes the experience as a smothering of the self, his own thoughts lost amidst a tangle of strange, sad memories, not my own. Grandmother Silk was seeking union, a complete absorption of all consciousness within Farloom into her own. Yet some were able to resist. The reasons for this resistance are unclear. Benjen and Crawl, two muck roach farmers, humorously speculate that it's either caused by being too devout or not devout enough, ultimately concluding it's safest not to think about it at all. Their simple wisdom hints at a complex truth. Perhaps those who were unburdened by the Citadel's grand narratives, who were grounded in the simple realities of survival, were less susceptible to its spiritual successor's grand call for unity. During this period, Grandmother Silk also began to create new children, beings spun entirely from silk, phantom, and lace to replace the weavers who had betrayed her. A memory fragment reveals her motivation: better a child spun mad than none. Better a child spun frail than none. Better a child spun pure than them, one to wish our waking, a child born loyal. The first of these was Lace, designed to be the perfect, loyal daughter. The caretaker describes her as having the look of a child and a mind to match, but she has wandered the citadel for ages, a 1,000-year-old child created to fill the void left by her treacherous older sisters. The second daughter was Phantom, who appears to be a discarded prototype. By the time Hornet finds her, she is deteriorating, forgotten in the Citadel's exhaust organ. Despite their different roles, both silk-spun daughters share a tragic existence. A thread memory shows Lace speaking to Phantom, lamenting their fate. She spun us to fade, she spun us to break. Why us, sister? Lace deeply resents her frail, temporary form, seeing it not as life, but as a husk shaped to act as a child. Their existence was a cruel mimicry of life, designed for loyalty but cursed with fragility. Phantom has come to accept her fading fate, but Lace's resentment continues to burn, a key motivator in her future actions. With her power growing, Grandmother Silk sent her enthralled choir bugs out across the world to hunt down and retrieve the fugitive weavers and their descendants. Cages in the cradle detail their captures: an 1/8-part weaver found in the sand sea wastes, another mortally wounded in the Black Barrens, a 1/4-part weaver staked to serve under the City of Steel. A choral commandment describes the mission to capture Hornet herself. To the kingdom of the White Worm, claim the weaver in 1/2 part, last of their line, sensed strong with silk. This implies the weavers could be psychically sensed from Farloom, their unique silken essence acting as a beacon. Grandmother Silk likely wanted to reabsorb their power, to bind them to herself and reclaim the strength they had stolen. While several were brought back, only one is found alive: Widow. A mysterious and fanatical follower of Grandmother Silk, her mask has been forcibly removed and heavy pins driven into her spine to prevent her from weaving her own silk. Her dialogue suggests she never fled with her sisters, referring to Hornet as spawn of those who dared to flee. She may have been the sole loyalist who remained in Farloom, perhaps punished by her own sisters for her devotion, or perhaps she mutilated herself in a demented display of fealty to her mother. Her true history remains shrouded in mystery, a testament to the complex loyalties and betrayals that define the Weaver's story. Meanwhile, the Weavers who had fled to Hallownest, the group that included Hornet's mother, Hera the Beast, continued their quest to create a savior. They settled in Deepenest, where Hera became queen. When the Pale King of Hallownest sought her aid to become a dreamer and seal away the radiance, Hera agreed on one condition: he must give her a child. The result was Hornet, a being of unique heritage, born of both Pale Worm and Ancient Weaver. A memory from this time shows the other Weavers watching over the young Hornet, urging her to prove yourself more Weaver than Worm, hoping her dual nature would finally create the weapon they needed to defeat Grandmother Silk. But Hera resisted this, telling her daughter to ignore their whispers, to forge her own path and find another hope beyond. In a strange and unexplained turn, the Weavers of Deepenest eventually abandoned Hallownest, leaving for their old home Farloom, according to a charmed description. What became of them is unknown. They vanished, leaving behind only their desperate hope, now embodied in the child they left behind. It was this child, this daughter of two worlds, that Grandmother Silk's choir bugs finally captured. They sealed Hornet in a rune cage and began the long journey back to Farloom, bringing the kingdom's prophesied savior back not as a liberator, but as a prisoner. The stage was set for the final act of Farloom's long, tragic play. As the captured hornet is transported back to Farloom, a single errant silkfly flits through the air and touches her rune cage. The seal shatters. Hornet escapes her captors, plummeting into the deepest part of the kingdom, Bone Bottom. Unwilling to simply flee and be hunted again, she resolves to ascend to the source of her capture, telling the chapel maid, "Then I shall seek their citadel. If the veiled bugs would go to such lengths to bring me here, I intend to find out why." Thus begins her own pilgrimage, a journey not of faith but of defiance. Along the way, she encounters the myriad pilgrims who still cling to the citadel's empty promises, the quiet, the fearful, the aged, the solemn, a chorus of deluded souls treading a path paved with the bones of their predecessors. She also discovers the last vestiges of her own ancestors, the weavers who stayed behind. Their corpses, preserved in shrines, have waited for her arrival. They offer her their strength, their lingering power, in the hope that she will finally fulfill their ancient prayer and dethrone the monarch they could not. Her journey is a grim ascent through a dying world, a land haunted by a waking god. She faces not just monstrous bugs but the very environment itself: lava, spiked traps, thorns, and other hazards, a kingdom actively trying to reject her. She witnesses strange rituals, breaks bread with the few bugs who have resisted the haunting, and even learns to play songs on her needle, turning the tool of her heritage into an instrument of her own will. During her ascent, she is confronted by Lace, grandmother Silk's silk-spun daughter. In the deep docks, Lace is seen conducting silkflies, hinting that she may have been the one who freed Hornet at the start, perhaps out of a complex mix of jealousy and a desire to see a worthy challenger reach her mother. She sees Hornet as a rival for her mother's attention and seeks to kill her. Depending on Hornet's path, their first encounter can be a fierce battle or a simple taunt, establishing Lace as a recurring, conflicted antagonist. Hornet's path also leads her to Bellheart, a town caught in the web of the haunting. Its citizens are strung up like marionettes, their will subsumed. Hornet identifies the phenomenon as the thread sickness, a focused, weaponized use of silk. The culprit is revealed to be Widow, the loyalist weaver who manipulates the silk with music, offering the ensnared townsfolk as a gift to Grandmother Silk. After defeating Widow, Hornet binds the ancestral art of the needle, further embracing her weaver heritage on her own terms. From here, two paths to the citadel open. She can ring 5 bells scattered throughout the land to challenge the last judge at the peak of the blasted steps, or she can venture through the mists of Sinner's Road to confront Phantom, the discarded daughter in the exhaust organ. Defeating either of these powerful guardians grants her access to the citadel. Upon her arrival, the fortress is eerily silent until Lace appears again, mocking her efforts. Hornet declares that she knows a higher being is responsible for the haunting, to which Lace scoffs, claiming she has no chance. Hornet's reply is laced with the wisdom of her past trials in Hallownest. "I've found those who claim themselves a god can rarely match the title. And experience tells me even gods can fall." In that moment, as if in response to this challenge, Grandmother Silk lets out a piercing scream from the cradle, and the citadel springs to life, its halls now filled with the haunted husks of its former inhabitants. To reach the cradle, Hornet must first defeat the cogwork dancers and then complete the threefold melody. This requires her to recover the 3 separate musical parts held by the architects, the keepers, and the conductors. This journey is designed to be impossible for a normal bug, with near insurmountable climbs and laws forbidding the sharing of the melodies, reinforcing the idea that the citadel's true nature was never meant to be discovered by the common pilgrim. On her way, she encounters Trobio, the master of the great stage, a tragic figure who dreams of reigniting the spirit of Farloom through a spectacular, deadly dance. He sees Hornet as the perfect partner, but their performance ends with his death, a sacrifice he seems to make willingly for the sake of his art and his dying kingdom. After recovering the 3 melodies, Hornet plays the completed song to the statues at the top of the cogwork core, finally gaining access to the lift to the cradle. There, in a field of flowers, Lace waits for one final confrontation. After their battle, Lace's resentment and pain finally spill out. She despises her silken form, seeing it as a cruel mimicry of life. Hornet attempts to console her, but Lace, consumed by her own tragedy, rejects her pity and seemingly dies. At last, Hornet confronts Grandmother Silk. The pale monarch is not the bug-like creature she might have expected, but a strange, almost humanoid woman, a being of primal, otherworldly power. After a grueling battle, Hornet defeats her and binds her power just as she had done with her Weaver ancestors. As she does, her own crest expands, her mask transforming into a Weaver-style visage, and her body begins to sprout additional pairs of arms. A thick web of silk erupts from the cradle, enveloping the entire citadel. This is the Weaver Queen ending. It is the fulfillment of the Weaver's ancient plan. Hornet has usurped the monarch, but in doing so, she has become her. It is a victory, but not her own. She has followed the path laid out for her, becoming a new ruler in a kingdom still built on subjugation, her own desires and freedom sacrificed to a destiny she did not choose. This ending stands as a somber reflection on a conversation she had with the caretaker, where she admitted that while a part of her, the part born of pale blood, desires dominance, another part, the part she sides with, wishes not to claim a monarch's mantle, but to see this kingdom's bugs unshackled. The Weaver Queen ending is the death of that wish. The path of the Weaver Queen is not the only fate available to Hornet. Other, stranger destinies await, born from choices made in the shadowed corners of Farloom. One such path leads to the Twisted Child ending. This requires Hornet to encounter Greymoot, a bizarre, plant-like creature in Shellwood, and bring it a twisted bud. This initiates a ritual where Greymoot injects Hornet with a parasite, a living organism that limits her silk and tools. While she is meant to seek a cure from a questionable doctor named Yarnabe, Hornet can instead choose to carry this parasite with her all the way to the final confrontation with Grandmother Silk. When she defeats the monarch while still infected, a different kind of binding occurs. The parasite's roots erupt not just from Hornet, but from the defeated pale being as well. The two become entangled, their forms merging and hardening into a single, grotesque sculpture of wood and chitin. From this new, organic throne, something else is heard escaping, a new life born from the fusion of three beings. It is not an ending of freedom, but of transformation into something alien and unknowable. The kingdom is not saved, but rather becomes the cradle for a new, parasitic power. An even darker fate was once possible, an ending known as Strung to Serve, which was ultimately cut from the game but whose echoes remain. This outcome would have occurred if Hornet failed to ring the sacred bells scattered across Farloom, bells which were originally intended to weaken Grandmother Silk's power. In this scenario, at the climax of their battle, the monarch would overpower Hornet. The final scene would depict a horrific fusion of the two, a new being combining Hornet's strength with Grandmother Silk's will. This entity would then send its threads down to the pilgrims below, its enslavement of Farloom now absolute and unopposed. It is the ultimate bad ending, where the hero's strength is not just defeated, but absorbed and repurposed by the very evil she sought to destroy. But there is a path that aligns with Hornet's true desire, a path that seeks not to replace the system, but to break it entirely. This is the path of the snared silk ending. After helping enough people, the caretaker, revealing a deeper knowledge than he lets on, suggests a method to trap Grandmother Silk for good. This requires collecting the souls of his remaining relatives, the chapel maid, the bell hermit, and a deceased seeker whose soul was taken by the Stilken. It also requires recovering the Weaver's failed prototype weapon, the snare setter. The caretaker takes these components and sets a trap within the cradle. After Hornet defeats Grandmother Silk, instead of binding her, she plays her needle in, activating the trap. The snare setter springs to life, but it does not merely bind. It opens a shimmering black portal directly to the abyss. Void tendrils erupt, pulling the monarch into the darkness. In a last act of defiance, Grandmother Silk grabs onto Hornet, attempting to drag her down with her, but at the critical moment, Lace reappears. In a final, shocking act of rebellion against the mother who created her so frail, she cuts Hornet free, allowing herself to be pulled into the void with Grandmother Silk. The portal collapses in on itself, but as the dust settles, void-covered silk threads reach up from the ground below. The ending does not conclude, it transforms the world, triggering the game's hidden third act, Abyss. Hornet awakens to a changed Farloom. The kingdom is wrecked, its environment scarred by black threads of void-infused silk. NPCs are dead, enemies are possessed by darkness. She confronts the caretaker and his family, who reveal their true identity. They are snail shamans, ancient beings fascinated with the void. They had intended to use the snare setter to imprison Grandmother Silk in the abyss, but Lace's unforeseen sacrifice complicated everything. With her beloved daughter trapped with her, Grandmother Silk is now violently resisting the void, endlessly creating silk to shield Lace from being consumed. This struggle has caused the void-infused threads to erupt into Farloom, threatening to tear the entire kingdom apart. Hornet resolves to descend into the abyss herself. With the help of the Forgemaster Balo, she uses an old diving bell to plunge into the darkness below all things. Deep within the sea of void, she finds Grandmother Silk's new cocoon, but is confronted by an astral projection of Lace. Lace mocks her, relishing the idea of dooming her mother and all of Farloom as the ultimate act of rebellion against her own cursed existence. But Hornet is undeterred. She declares that she will acquire the bloom that repels the dark. She returns to the surface and learns from the snail shamans that this flower, the Everbloom, exists only within her own memories. To manifest it in the real world, they must perform a powerful ritual requiring the old hearts, the lingering strength of Farloom's pre-Citadel rulers, Crust King Khan, Scar Singer Carmelita, and Nith. Using a new song, Hornet travels into the memories of these ancient beings, battling them in their prime to claim their spiritual hearts. With these, the shamans cast their spell, sending Hornet into the Red Memory, a dreamscape of her past. Here, she relives the Weaver's attempts to shape her, Hera's encouragement to forge her own path, and her training with Hive Queen Vessa. The climax of this memory is a confrontation with the White Lady, her stepmother. Hornet condemns the Pale Beings' schemes, their willingness to sacrifice their own children to the void to create the vessels. She rejects their weak paths to salvation, declaring her own strength to craft the world as she dreams it. Through this act of defiance and self-actualization, she manifests the Everbloom, a delicate white flower with the power to repel the dark. The snail shamans, their energy spent, fade away, their shells left behind as a silent testament to their sacrifice. With the Everbloom in hand, Hornet descends into the abyss once more. Lace's projection appears one last time, urging her to join them in oblivion. Hornet's reply is a declaration of her identity and purpose. Oblivion may take you, child. My own life I shall not sacrifice. I remain a daughter of Hallownest and the void below all things. That darkness I will fear no longer. She plunges into the void sea, using the flower as a shield, and enters the silken sphere Grandmother Silk has created. Inside, she finds Lace, now corrupted and possessed by the void, a being known as Lost Lace. Hornet battles her one last time, her blade slowly cleansing the void from Lace's body. Once Lace is freed, Hornet turns to the weakened Grandmother Silk and pleads for enough silk to escape. As they rocket back towards the surface, the Everbloom's petals disintegrate and the void tendrils strike, but they are stopped. From the darkness emerges the Night, Hornet's sibling from Hallownest, now a being of focused void, a lord of shades. Accompanied by the rest of the shades, the unified abyss, the Night has come to save its sister. It gently lifts Hornet and Lace to the surface as the void threads around them dissipate. The two awaken. Lace lets out a small laugh, her cynicism finally broken. Hornet gives her a stern yet familial Weaver stare. This is the sister of the void ending. Farloom is saved from destruction. The system of endless song and toil is eradicated, and two sisters, one of Worm and Weaver, the other of Silk and Sorrow, are finally free. So what is this story even about? Perhaps it is a story about lineage, a rejection of the idea that we are bound by the desires and sins of our ancestors. Hornet is constantly pulled between the dominating nature of her pale father and the manipulative scheming of her Weaver mother, yet she ultimately forges a third path, one of compassion and true freedom. Or maybe it is a biting criticism of religion as a tool of the powerful, a mechanism used to extract labor from an unwitting proletariat who are promised salvation in exchange for their servitude. The entire Citadel is a testament to how faith can be perverted into a system of control. It could also be an examination of truth itself and how the intricate webs of lies we spin to protect ourselves will inevitably ensnare us, just as the Weaver's web of the Citadel became their own prison. Perhaps most intimately, it is a story about the complex and often fraught relationships between mothers and daughters, the destructive love of grandmother Silk, the protective defiance of Hera, and the eventual, hard-won siblinghood between Hornet and Lace, a bond finally free of any strings attached. In the end, what do you think? Was it grace or defiance that started it all?